I had a conversation with someone not too long ago, and I was telling him that I was in the middle of rereading one of my favorite books. And he thought that that concept was really strange. He was like, "You reread books?" I was like, "Yeah, I mean, obviously only the good ones. Like, don't you rewatch good movies?" And he's like, "Yeah, but that's different. With books, like once you've read them, you've read them. There's no point in reading them again." And I could not disagree more with that statement. One of my favorite things about rereading is finding things in books that I didn't notice the last time that I read the story. You guys know how much I love Tolkien. If you come to our house, his books have their own devoted shelf in our dining room. Well, as many times as I have read his books, there was a moment that I missed every single time until the most recent time that I was reading through. There's this moment, well, when the fellowship kind of sets out on their journey, one of the members in the company is Aragorn. If you're not familiar with the story, he's the rightful king. He's the heir to the throne, but he's been living in a self-imposed exile under anonymity. When they set out, he is not the leader of the expedition. But when their guide falls, he is kind of forced into a de facto leadership role. And he doesn't really know which way is best. He doesn't know which way the guide, when they set out, intended for them to go. And the weight of those decisions are now on his shoulders, and it's a heavy load to bear. But the moment that that changes in the story is a really fascinating point. The fellowship breaks up. They're scattered. Two of their comrades are taken prisoner. One of them is killed. Frodo and Sam set out with the ring for the most dangerous part of the mission alone. By all accounts, it would seem like the fellowship has failed. And this is the moment when Aragorn's clarity and his resolve as a leader actually crystallizes. He tells the ones that are left with him that the ring bearer and his fate is now kind of out of their hands, that only one thing remains in front of them as long as they still have breath in their lungs, which is to not abandon Merry and Pippin to their torture and their captivity. And rereading that section again thrilled me in ways that it just never had before. Because we can so often think about limited options as a negative. When there's only one thing to do and we don't have a choice in the matter, we feel stifled. We feel oppressed. We feel inconvenienced. But when Tolkien does, in a matter of just a few chapters, as he turns that idea on its head, it's actually the givenness of the road before him that makes his eyes sharpened and his heart strengthened and his mind is cleared. When just moments before there was kind of all this uncertainty of all of the options and it all kind of hung like a heavy weight, now the singularity, the definitiveness of purpose, instead kind of see him rise to the occasion and become a force to be reckoned with. And I think this moment, this kind of literary moment, grabbed me the way that it did. Because one, I think that's a type of freedom that we have largely cut ourselves off from. I think it's just something that we're missing. We're missing this, the kind of freedom and strengthening that it comes to be given a specific task instead of being able to have unlimited options before you. But I also think that it grabbed me because of how closely it parallels a related feature in the Gospels. This is why it's powerful, because it's so deep down true. Now, Jesus didn't struggle with indecisiveness. He didn't have a season of uncertainty and doubt. And yet, nevertheless, the Gospel writers do portray this shift, this moment, this turn. This season in Jesus' ministry that's characterized by a laser-like focus on Jerusalem and the cross that's coming. Only a few chapters ago, kind of at the end of chapter 9, Luke borrowed the language of Isaiah 50 to describe that very thing, saying that Jesus determined, or kind of very literally, he set his face like a flint to go to Jerusalem, and nothing was going to dissuade him. His eyes are locked on to the task that lies at the end of this road. And I want us to kind of pause here and just consider that for a moment, because that is what this section of Luke, that's what this whole sermon series that we've been walking through is all about. We are on the road to Jerusalem together. And I want us to remember all of the different things that entails. At risk of stating the obvious, for one, this means that all of the events are happening on the road to Jerusalem. As Jesus kind of shifts from Galilee and begins going to Jerusalem, all of the events in these chapters kind of take place during that period and in that location. But also, as he's kind of steadily getting closer and closer to Jerusalem, other themes start to emerge. In a more figurative sense, these things are also foreshadowing his approaching death. You can't separate Jerusalem from the crucifixion that's about to happen in Jerusalem. And so it's fitting to remember that as we're getting nearer and nearer to the end of the road, we're getting nearer and nearer to the climax of the gospel story when Jesus' death is coming. We should expect to see, we have seen, more discussion around that impending death. But all of that also means that the conflicts and the confrontations with the Pharisees are increasing. They're heating up. If all of that is going to kind of boil over in Jerusalem at Jesus' betrayal and his arrest, then we should expect to see a mounting tension. We should expect to see kind of escalating hostilities as we get further and further down the road. Because Jesus is preaching a gospel that they are staunchly opposed to. On the surface level, it seems like they should be on the same side. They should want the same things. They should want to honor God. They should want to teach his law. But sadly, in many ways, they're diametrically opposed to what Jesus is doing and what he's preaching. And our passage today begins on one of those conundrums, one of those things that they have been saying something very different from what Jesus has been saying. The teaching of the Sanhedrin, the governing body, the religious authority in Israel at the time, their teaching states that all of Israel would participate in the life that was to come. If you're a son of Abraham, you're guaranteed a spot in the kingdom. But Jesus has been giving off a different vibe, hasn't he? Just think about even the passages that we've read recently. That has not been the theme of any of them. Based on what he's been saying, the cost of discipleship stuff that we've been talking about, it seems like Jesus is suggesting something different. He's warning them with things like, you too must repent or you're going to perish. He said that he's going to bring division that's going to split even households. That doesn't sound like all of you have already punched your ticket, does it? And so it makes sense that this unnamed guy in the crowd asks, are you saying only a few people are going to be saved? Like if I'm reading this correctly, if I'm interpreting what you're saying, are you saying only a few people are going to be saved? Can we kind of clarify that and get you on the record there? Because this doesn't seem to be the open and shut case that we thought, that all of us are just going to participate in the kingdom no matter what. And interestingly, Jesus doesn't just answer with a yes or a no. His response would indicate, yes, that is what I'm saying. He characterizes the door as narrow. He talks about the reality that many are going to try to enter it but be unable. But he doesn't just say that straight. What does he do instead? Look at his response in verse 24. He urges them to make every effort. The conversation is reframed. He takes it from a philosophical one about how many will or will not be saved, and he reframes it instead to a personal one about what you will or will not do to ensure that you are going to be saved. It makes me kind of stop and ask the question, how many of our questions would Jesus reframe like that? Who's my neighbor? Make every effort to be a neighbor to those that God puts in front of you. Is it possible for someone to fall away from the faith and lose their salvation? Make every effort to see that you don't. How much of this can I kind of get away with before I cross a line? Is it technically a sin? Make every effort to live holy, upright, and blameless lives. How many times do I have to forgive my brother? Make every effort to forgive others the way your Father in heaven has forgiven you. How often would Jesus reframe our questions? It doesn't mean that this man's question isn't valid, and Jesus isn't sidestepping an answer, but his response does very clearly move the emphasis from the theological quandary to instead the personal responsibility of this question. Make every effort to enter through the narrow door. Now, this is not an endorsement of works righteousness. Writer and philosopher Dallas Willard once said, "Grace is not opposed to effort. It's opposed to earning." The scriptures are full of exhortations to strive and exert effort. I remember a few years ago at our sports camp, in our oldest age group, one of the boys was making fun of one of the other boys as he was kind of doing the soccer drill that I had set out, and he kind of nudged some of the other kids in the group, and he was like, "What a tryhard." It was the first time that I had ever heard the term used. I'm just going to be honest. And so I asked him, like, "I'm sorry, what did you call him?" And he was like, "Why, I called him a tryhard." And I was like, "Is that meant to be an insult?" And he said, "Well, yeah, obviously." I was like, "Why? Like, don't you want to be a tryhard?" He's like, "No way, man, no. I'm not a tryhard." I was like, "What?" I literally sat him down right there in the middle of sports camp, and I asked him, what kind of life would that be? Like, never having anything that you cared enough about to try hard. Like, what kind of life would that be? Never knowing how well you could actually do on something because you were always scared to look like you were trying. Like, you can make it look to all the people around you like everything comes easy to you and that you don't even have to break a sweat. But you're never actually going to know what you could do if you tried. And when things get hard, nobody's going to count on you or rely on you because they've never seen you do anything hard. It just always looked easy. A couple minutes later, when it was his turn to go, he tripped over the ball and fell on his face in front of all of his friends. And at the end of camp that day, he came up to me and he said, "Coach, I've changed my mind. I think I want to try hard." Friends, be like that kid. Have the humility to try hard. To say, you know what, I think I want to make sure to start exerting an effort. Jesus makes it clear that effort will be involved. Guys, I want to talk to you specifically, especially to the young men in the room for a moment. Have you ever felt like you just kind of have this innate impulse and this desire to fight, to compete and strive and contend in some way? The reason is because you do. It's not a defect. I remember when we took the student fellowship to play mini golf over in Bayers Lake, and I'm just going to rat you guys out for a moment because apparently competing at mini golf wasn't enough. And so while we waited on everyone else to finish, Alex and Clarence and Liam and others spent, I don't even know how much of your money, just feeding tokens into the punching machine to find out who could register the highest number and the hardest punch. If you have ever wondered what you're supposed to do with that kind of innate wiring to strive and contend, this is it. It's not something that needs to be toned down or hushed up or that you need to find a way to make softer. But it's also not something to just be kind of unchained and unloosed like a brawler who's ready to beat up the next guy that crosses you. You were built to strive and contend here in this arena, the arena of holiness and the pursuit of Jesus and the narrow door of what it looks like to enter into life in Christ. You are meant to put every ounce of competitive juice that you have into making every effort to strive to enter through that narrow door. This is where all of that impulse gets channeled. We used to run this drill in strength and conditioning practice where players would lay face down on the ground side by side. And then about 10 meters away was this little small kind of narrow gate that was only wide enough for one person to fit through. And when the coach blew his whistle, you had to get off the ground as quickly as you could. And you just had to do whatever you had to do to be the one who got through that gate. It's actually how I ended up with the first stitches in my mouth, was doing that drill. But in a lot of ways, that is the reality of the Christian life that Jesus is making plain here. Not because you're surrounded by other people and that it's either you or them, but because you are very much surrounded by temptations, sins, and weights that will easily entangle. And it very well might be you or them. It might be good things like career aspirations or the desire to be in a relationship. It might be pressures to conform to expectations of society or family or friends. It might be something very personal like emotions, appetites, fears, wants. But you are surrounded by things that are working to push you off your line, to edge you away from the narrow gate. And Jesus says, make every effort to hold that ground. Young, old, men, women, whoever you are, make every effort to hold your ground and enter through the narrow door. This metaphor of the narrow door it's a powerful image. It's one that's captured the hearts and minds of many as they read Jesus' words. It's central to John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, which if you have not read Pilgrim's Progress, do yourself a favor and get a copy of it. The broad road leads to destruction. The small wicket gate and the narrow path leads to life. It's related to the metaphor that Jesus uses in John 10, that there's only one gate, that the thief climbs over the wall and tries to get in some other way, which is a picture that inspires this very vivid garden scene in Lewis's Magician's Nephew, right? This image of the one gate, the one door, the narrow way, when broad is the road that leads to destruction. The door is narrow and few find it. But here in this passage, Jesus provides another detail about the door. It isn't only narrow, but there's also a time coming when it's going to be shut. Many will try to enter and won't be able to get in once the homeowner gets up and shuts the door. Remember back in Luke 11 when Jesus said, knock and the door will be opened to you? Now he clarifies, knock now and it will be opened. Knock then, after the door's been shut, and it won't ever be opened again. Narrow is an impediment to entrance. Shut makes entrance impossible. But look at what Jesus says the response will be. You will stand outside and knock, and you'll say, open up for us. Open up for us. They're sure that they're still going to be given VIP access. I mean, it's us. We're the good guys. Notice the response. I don't know you. They'll say, we ate and drank in your presence. You taught in our streets. We're the hometown crowd. And he says, I don't know you or where you're from. Your status doesn't save you. Your birthplace doesn't save you. He says, get away, evildoers. This is going to get even clearer as the passage continues, but Jesus is addressing Israel here. He's making it clear that many Israelites, though they presume on their status as children of Abraham, many Israelites are not going to receive the Son. And therefore, if they don't receive the Son, they're going to stand on the outside as they watch their fathers, as they watch Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob enter the kingdom. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the founders of the Israelite people, the patriarchs. This is their security blanket. This is what they would have had to boast in, to say, I'm descended from the giants of Genesis themselves. I'm one of them. I'm one of their children, the big guys, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When Joseph brought his father Jacob, who the Lord named Israel, into Egypt because there was famine in the land, guess who rode into Egypt with Jacob? All his sons, and all of his sons' sons, the whole family. Jacob's kind of safe passage into Egypt guaranteed safe passage for all of Israel's offspring. Jesus teaches the kingdom I'm speaking about is not like that one. You will not ride in with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob like you did into Egypt. No, instead, you'll stand on the outside and you'll watch the nations. You'll watch the Gentiles, those who aren't born from Abraham's blood. They'll come from east and west and north and south, and they will ride in to share in the banquet instead. Some of the last made first, some of the first made last. One takeaway for us from this passage would be for those of you who are sitting here and you feel like you are just the least likely candidate to be a recipient of God's grace. Maybe you're here and you're saying something like, it's great that God saves people. I'm glad that he uses them to do great things, that he makes them holy. I'm really happy for all of those who get to enter in through that narrow door that you're talking about. And I can get how God would do that kind of thing. Like my son or my friend or my aunt. Like they've got some really great, awesome qualities. I can understand why God would kind of bring them through that narrow door. There is just no way in this world that I am narrow door material. Don't be so sure. God doesn't save the likeliest candidates. The reality is that we're all unlikely candidates. The salvation of anybody is a miracle. The last are made first. Don't assume that you are disqualified. But let's also make sure that we don't miss the main point that Jesus intends for his listeners, that Luke intends for his readers, which is don't assume that you automatically qualify either. Don't presume on God's grace. This might look like a variety of different things. For the original audience, it looked like presuming on the basis of their Jewish heritage. For you, maybe you're presuming on the good deeds that you've done, or at least the ones that you've tried to do. I'm not a bad person. Maybe you're presuming on your mental assent to the fact that Jesus is real, even if your life isn't aligned with that belief. So what if I'm not going to do everything that Jesus tells me to? What's he going to do? Kick me out of heaven for it? This passage would have a word of caution to us. Don't assume like you're already in. That attitude towards his word would cast doubt on whether you really are. And far be it from us, Gentiles, to look at Israel's rejection for rejecting the Messiah and scoff. If you think like, man, Jerusalem really missed the boat here in this passage, it's a good thing that I responded better than that. You're missing the point. This passage should fill you with nothing but humility. Paul makes this argument in Romans 11. He says, if God would cut off the natural branches from Abraham's tree because of unfaithfulness, and he would graft you, nations, in instead, how much easier do you think it would be to cut off the grafted branches if they turn out to be faithless and unfruitful? The thin ice beneath Jerusalem's feet should only make you walk with more care. Luke continues to kind of drive further home this point that Israel has rejected Jesus in these next verses when Herod, the governor of Israel, is trying to kill him. If you're looking for like a sign if someone's been rejected by a certain people, usually when their leader's trying to murder someone, that is a sign of rejection. And interestingly, notice that Jesus is warned by a group of Pharisees about this plot. If you're familiar with the Gospels, it might be easy to just kind of imagine the Pharisees as evil supervillains who only ever do wrong. They're filled with pride and hypocrisy, and everything they do is conniving and insincere. If only it were that easy, that would be a comforting thought. The sobering truth is that they weren't. They were pretty good guys. They were respectable, upstanding. Most of them were probably pretty good neighbors. They had a really zealous desire to know and teach and follow the law. I mean, at least some of them come up here and warn Jesus, like, hey, you should get out of here because trouble is brewing. We comfort ourselves by thinking the disciples, that's the everyman, like me. The Pharisees, they're rich and elite and overly spiritual, just kind of black-hearted villains. Those are the types that reject Jesus. It just isn't true. Jesus is rejected by honest, hardworking, well-intentioned, reasonable people who just don't give everything to him as Lord. That's who the Pharisees are. The door is narrow. And how is it that Jesus responds to this threat that they warn him about? Well, for one, he's obviously not afraid. He says, oh, he is he? Well, let me give you a message for that old fox. Which is a pretty hardcore response, right? From Jesus. But the real significant part of this answer is that we get two more announcements about his coming death and his resurrection. As the road to Jerusalem draws closer, he says, right now I'll be about my business, bringing healing, driving out demons, but make no mistake, on the third day, I will complete my work. And for Theophilus, kind of reading this gospel account for the first time, kind of already knowing the end of the story, that just has to be one of those like, oh snap kind of moments. Like, did you hear what my boy just said? On the third day, I will complete my work. And he's going to. When this road to Jerusalem ends, trust me, there is going to be a third day. And on that day, the work of healing and driving out the forces of evil is going to be completed. Not this day, Herod, but it's coming. This is a kind of mic drop moment as Jesus says, on the third day, I will complete my work. And then very poetically, he adds these parallel lines. I travel today and tomorrow and the next day because a prophet must perish in Jerusalem. Like the prophets of old, Uriah, Jeremiah, Zechariah. This prophet's blood is going to be called for and it's going to be spilled in Jerusalem's streets. Right now he's on the road, but when the road ends, it's going to mean his death. And it's also going to mean the completion of his work to heal and to set free. And the thing is, Jesus knows that he's being rejected. He's not caught off guard. He knows that the road that he's on is going to end in even more rejection. And even in the face of that, we see his compassion. He laments for Jerusalem. How often I longed to gather your children together, like a mother hen beneath her wings, but you were not willing. I think one of the encouraging things about this lament that Jesus gives here, even as we come to it on Mother's Day, if you're a mom right now in the room and maybe sometimes you've had the feeling of I look at the scriptures and I see this beautiful picture of the Lord as Father and kind of envy dads as they get to kind of aspire to that type of fatherhood. I look to Christ and see him as our brother. What does it look like to be a true and perfect brother and to have that image to be called into? But who am I supposed to look at? What am I supposed to do as I try to raise this barbaric horde that's running loose in my house? Who am I supposed to look to for a picture of motherhood? And the answer is the same. You look to your Savior. Jesus expresses this desire to gather Jerusalem, to shelter Jerusalem with the full weight of nurture and care and love and protection that could be expressed. It's not Jesus, but it's Jerusalem who's unwilling. They've rejected the Son, and they've abandoned the house. And so Jesus concludes with this reference to Psalm 118. He says, "You will not see me again until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" And this is a really tricky verse. What is Jesus saying here about Israel? What is going to happen when they see him again? There's a possibility that this is hinting towards a day when Jerusalem will finally see her king for who he is. That after all of that time, they will bless his name and they will praise his coming. Paul seems to suggest something along these lines in Romans 11, that God isn't finished yet with the role that Abraham's sons are to play. I think this is one of the many reasons why we need to be sure that we don't throw off the Old Testament, that we proclaim from the rooftops that we worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his son, the Lord Jesus Christ. Because praise God that he used Israel's hardened hearts to bring us into the fold of his grace, but may he use our worship to call Israel back to the God that they abandoned. But the more likely meaning of Jesus' words here in verse 35 is more severe. That they will not see him again until the day of his return, when the door has been closed. When every knee on earth is forced to bow, even the reluctant ones. And that this blessing is uttered as a forced confession. Luke's following accounts in chapter 14, the context of what Jesus has just said to him before would seem to lead us to this conclusion, which is why this lament is so tragic, because think about all that God has done to open this door to Israel. He chose Jacob when Jacob was utterly unchoosable. That is the story of the whole Old Testament, as God pours himself out again and again and again. Covenants made, punishments deferred, judges raised up, kings anointed, exiles ended, prophets sent. And Jesus has already referenced the spilling of the blood of the prophets. He knows that even that has not yet reached his climax, that there's even greater prophet's blood that's about to spill in Jerusalem's streets. But time after time, the Father has been opening the door and leading Israel by the hand, only to find generation after generation biting the hand that leads it. And yet still, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem to die, to throw wide open the narrow door. That's part of the beautiful mystery of the gospel. The door is both narrow and yet wide open at the same time. Until it's closed, it is wide open to you, no matter who you are or where you come from. You come from the east, west, north, south, from the greatest to the least. It's wide open, and yet many are going to miss it. His lament is not just for what they have rejected, for what they have missed. His lament is also for what he knows they're about to reject and what they're about to miss when this road to Jerusalem winds to an end. So the question is, what are you going to do with this? Because you are going to have to decide. The door is open. It's narrow. And yet it's wide open. But closing. What are you going to do? And I want to leave that for you to wrestle with. I'm going to remind you of just kind of two warnings as you wrestle with that. One, don't miss the door that Jesus died to open. This door isn't just open automatically. It was costly to open that narrow door. There would be no greater tragedy than for you to miss it. Jesus says, make every effort to enter through the narrow door. But the reality is that that no effort in the world on your part ever could have opened that door to start with. There is a new and a living way opened, a means by which you can enter into the joys of the King and into the joys of his kingdom forever, but it was only opened by the cross. It cost Jesus his life. Don't forsake so costly a gift. And second, don't presume on your status and rest on your laurels. No matter who you are or how much you know or what good things you've done, keep a careful watch over your heart. It is no small matter when your heart starts loving other things more than Jesus. That is a life or death emergency. The things that surround you on every side would love nothing more than to weigh you down or shift you a hair to the side. It doesn't really matter to the enemy how much you miss by, as long as you miss. In fact, missing the door by just a smidge has a lot of perks in his mind. It's pretty effective at misleading others. You might love and admire and respect Jesus in every way, but just have this one area that he doesn't get a say over. He can have almost everything. Almost everything. The reality is Satan would love nothing more than that. Make every effort to enter through the narrow door. And now it's time for you to decide what you're going to do with that. And I'm just going to leave you with it.